I think that a lot of stuff has gone into the groundwater.
There's something in the well.
We have become way too casual about allowing poisons to be in our drinking water.
We don't know everything that's going on here.
I believe it's in the soil.
There's no sun getting to the bottom, there's no grasses growing.
Dumped into the toilet, they go into the rivers.
Public policy decisions should be based on good scientific fact.
We've reached a tipping point.
Anything we put on that island ends up into the water.
We're all in this thing together.
Good evening and welcome to this News 12 Newsday special, What's in the Water? Live from the Newsday headquarters in Melville. Now, water quality is a major issue that impacts all Long Islanders. So tonight's discussion is going to be about educating you, the viewer, and diving into what's being done and what can be done to protect this vital resource. Now, we've assembled a team of experts that includes water officials, lawmakers, both on the state and local level, and environmentalists. And we have a live audience on hand as well. Some have submitted questions that we'll get to in a few minutes. But first, let's take an in-depth look at what's in the water.
Every drop of drinking water on Long Island comes from one place: aquifers, layers of sand that hold rainwater like a giant sponge. But that precious resource faces threats. Chemicals from industrial sites, some of them cancer-causing, spreading underground, tainting public water wells. Traces of pesticides that have been found in 1 out of 4 of those wells, especially out east. Even prescription drugs and personal care products are beginning to infiltrate Long Island's groundwater.
We think that pharmaceutical drugs should be dispensed by a doctor, not by your faucet. We have become way too casual about allowing poisons to be in our drinking water.
Water companies use high-tech filtering systems to treat the water so it meets or exceeds government health standards.
The public water supply is safe. It's a very, very high quality. It's constantly monitored.
But treating water is expensive, as high as $2 to $3 million per well. As pollution spreads underground, water bills are expected to jump.
If the trend continues, where we continue to see a degradation of really the aquifer, then what we believe is a relatively inexpensive utility bill right now will not be that years from now because of the cost that we will have to spend.
And it's not just the drinking water. Scientists say bays, streams, and lakes have been seriously affected by excess nitrogen, some of it from fertilizers and public sewage treatment plants. But most of it comes from cesspools and septic tanks, even if your home is miles from the shore.
It can take decades for that groundwater to make it there, particularly if you're talking about groundwater that originates further in the island. But eventually, all the water that goes onto the land seeps through the land and then comes out into our coastal bays and estuaries.
Nitrogen carried by groundwater is believed to be a cause of the brown tides and the red tides that have been devastating Long Island's bays.
And you don't even get one single fish in a net. They all live. We all live on an island. Anything we put on that island ends up into the water.
So let's talk a little more about where Long Island's water comes from. Long Island's aquifers are deposits of sand and pebbles left by glaciers during the Ice Age. And they consist of 3 layers: the upper glacial, the Magathy, and the Lloyd. And together they extend as deep as a quarter mile beneath the surface. They hold 80 trillion gallons of water. That is 12 times larger than Lake Champlain. Most of Long Island's drinking water actually comes from the Magathy, which is about 1,100 feet thick. Well, according to Melville-based H2M, about 30% of Nassau's public water wells have been tainted by volatile organic chemicals. 22% of Suffolk County Water Authority's 600 wells have been affected by various contaminants and are now equipped with filters. So that begs the question, how confident are Long Islanders when it comes to drinking water from the tap? Well, according to a News 12 Hofstra poll, 40% of Long Islanders say they're very confident about the safety of their drinking water. 35% say they're somewhat confident, but 23%, that is almost 1 out of 4 people, are not confident their water is safe. And that brings us to our first question about the health of our water supply. One teenager from Babylon boiled it down to this.
My question is if the water that you drink at your house is safe, because the way they filter it sometimes isn't safe and could just be harmful to you.
All right, let's start right off with our panel of experts. We're going to turn this one over to Jim Gorin, Chairman of the Suffolk County Water Authority. So, Jim, let me ask you this question. Is our tap water safe once it's treated?
Absolutely. You can guarantee that it's safe, it's clean, and it is something that costs a lot of money to treat as well as to filter where we have to do it. We put chlorine in all our water, which we're required to do by state law. We put lime in it, which we're required to do also to make sure that the natural acidic nature of the water doesn't corrode people's pipes. But as you pointed out, in part of our system, we do actually treat the water for various compounds that we're concerned about. We treat about 300 different compounds we look for, and we're only required by state and federal law to look at about half of them. So our standards are much higher than what the EPA and the DEC requires, and we make sure it's safe.
Okay, well, let's get a different perspective. Let's turn now to Dick Amper, Executive Director of the Long Island Pine Barren Society. Dick, let me pose this question to you. If our tap water is safe once it's treated, is it safe? And if it is, why do we even worry about the pollutants that go into our groundwater?
Well, your poll shows that 2/3 of the public are confident. If it takes that long an explanation to satisfy us that it's safe, then we need to give a second thought to that. We need to consider what's going into it. We're talking about more than 200 volatile organic compounds, more than 100 kinds of pesticides showing up. Pharmaceuticals are showing up, as you said in your report. That doesn't make me feel safe. It may meet some government standards. Well, you know this better than anybody, don't you?
I sure do. So let me give you a different perspective there, Stone. I'm going to say what people don't like to say, what makes them uncomfortable to say, and that is that our groundwater's not safe. 240 different toxic Superfund sites across Long Island. Volatile organic chemicals, heavy metals, MTBE from gasoline. We got pharmaceutical drugs. We have nitrates from our own sewage. We have 117 different pesticides. How safe do you feel? All of these chemicals are listed by the EPA as being toxic. Know why? Sit down, everyone at home, because they're toxic. And that means that they do things like cause cancer, reproductive ailments, immune system ailments, developmental ailments. This is not fun for us. We need to make a change. The question isn't, is our water safe to drink? The question is, how do we protect our groundwater, our sole source of drinking water? And right now, unfortunately, we have people who are indifferent who are trying to make a difference.
And I know a lot of people want to talk about this in the panel. We're going to continue this conversation, but let's start getting to the questions because we got a lot to cover there. I appreciate the answer. Let's go to our first question. This one is from the audience. This is Claudia Boricki. You are the president of North and Central Merrick Civic Association. If you could please stand up. Before we ask this question, I just want to let everyone know at home, our panelists have not been given these questions previously, so this is the first time they've heard them. So go ahead with your question.
Okay. If someone had one sip of wine, they would not be consuming enough alcohol to be considered legally drunk. However, if they are also consuming one sip of vodka, one sip of rum, one sip of scotch, they would soon find themselves not only drunk, but very sick. So it's the same thing with the volatile organic compounds and radionuclides. Our water may have acceptable levels of the individual toxic chemicals, but if we are consuming hundreds of these chemicals every time we take a drink of water, we can become very sick. Is our water killing us?
Okay, that's a great question. Let's turn this back to the panel. I'm going to start off with Adrian Esposito, Executive Director of Citizens Campaign for the Environment. I know that you are not shy about this, so what's your response to that?
My response is that no scientist will tell you, Claudia, that multiple exposures to many pesticides or many chemicals at one time is safe. The science just doesn't exist. It's called a synergistic effect, which means the duality of the effect and the multiple effects that it has on your body. And we don't know. There's thousands of pesticides on the market, thousands of chemicals, volatile organic chemicals, and we don't know the intermix of them and the reaction on the human body.
All right, let's move this over. I'm going to bring in Walter DeWittiak on this one. Walter is the Acting Director of Environmental Quality within Suffolk County's Department of Health Services. Give us your take on this question. Is the mixing of the pesticides potentially volatile?
Well, we take volatile organic chemicals and pesticides very seriously. Unlike nitrates, which are going to get into the groundwater because people generate nitrates, these are chemicals which really shouldn't be in the groundwater whatsoever, and our goal is to really eliminate the presence of them. That being said, there are stresses on the aquifer that are manageable, and we're talking about trace levels. The standards are set not only for individual chemicals, but also for combinations of chemicals, so that there's no unreasonable risk posed and that the water is safe.
Okay, let me ask you this, and I'm going to bring in what Jim said earlier, that the standards exceed the federal and state levels. Is that enough? I mean, have we become too lax in what, as Adrian pointed out, and what we are allowing in our water?
There's probably no other jurisdiction that you'll find anywhere that goes through more extraordinary efforts to monitor and manage their water supply. If you had to design a harder place in Suffolk, you couldn't do it. We have 1,000 public water supply wells over an aquifer, which is mostly unsewered, and it's a sandbox. These chemicals dissolve and they travel. These chemicals are traveling toward our wells, so it's a challenge to site your wells, to limit your pollution, and to make sure that you're monitoring. We in the health department monitor for over 350 parameters, well in excess of any federal and state requirements. If you're on the public water supply, you're presumptively safe. There is just no better water anywhere in terms of what's delivered to you, and we're vigilant about things like pharmaceuticals, personal care products, pesticides, and their degradants. We're finding them in trace compounds. And we keep looking and making sure that we keep the water clean.
Obviously a complex subject. Let's bring in the viewer at home. If you want to know what's in your water, it's obviously crucial to be able to read your local district's water quality report. Now with a quick tutorial on how to make sense of these documents, we turn to Dennis Kelleher. He's the president of H2M Water. Mr. Kelleher's company provides engineering services to more than 30 public water systems here in New York. So, Dennis, appreciate you taking the time to walk us through this. Where can we find these water district reports?
Sure, Stone. Actually, the Long Islanders, it was the first place in the nation where the public water suppliers had to reach out to the public and let them know on an annual basis what is the water quality of our wells. We've been doing it for 25 years. The rest of the country has caught up to us and is also doing it. So every year, by May 31st, the public water suppliers needed to deliver it to anybody who receives public water supply.
Okay, and that's on the website.
Well, this year, the federal regulations changed where you can now do it electronically. So every public water supplier has it on their website.
Okay.
So if you go to your public water supplier's website, that information will be there.
And let's get to the meat of this. So you brought a copy of that, and we're going to have some graphs up on the monitor to let people know exactly what you're looking at. I went through, that's a 4-page document. Dennis, I'm a lawyer, and when I read those first 2 pages, that was written for me. It wasn't written, I mean, why is it so complicated?
The federal and state regulations are very specific on what mandatory language you have in there, and it is very confusing. The water suppliers are really trying to make it more user-friendly. We're having a difficult time doing it because it's very technical. When you talk about we're sampling and testing for 300 different compounds, half of them I can't even pronounce, and we'll show on the list that.
Okay, so let's get to the report. If you're basically at home, you just want to know what's in my water. Is it dangerous for me? There's a chart.
In every annual water supply statement, there will be a chart of detected contaminants. Okay, and you had it up on the screen before. It's a lot of information, but there are 2 columns really to center in on. One is the actual level detected, and it needs to be arranged from the low to the high.
So if I'm at home, so we can just kind of bottom line what this is there, because it is complicated to get through, and it does take a little bit of time and some translation for the average viewer, just so we can move on. It's the source of your water, the cost, statutorily required, the contaminants the district uses, the contaminants tested for, and
type of treatment provided.
Type of treatment provided, and whether it occurs naturally or not.
Correct.
Okay.
And now I use the word contaminants, but this list of contaminants, some of them are naturally forming. That minerals, for example, iron in the water. It's not harmful, but it's a problem and discolors the water.
And I know Adrian Esposito and Dick Amper, you want to jump in there, but let's keep moving. I'll give you a chance to talk a little bit later. We're going to move forward because we have a lot to cover. So when it comes to the water supply, one major concern, those Superfund sites. Those are the abandoned hazardous waste sites that have been identified for cleanup. Now, there are separate state and federal versions of this program. On Long Island, 109 state Superfund sites still classified as an ongoing environmental threat. Additionally, on the federal level, there are 33 sites on the EPA's national priority list. So who pays for these drugs, these cleanups, which can run into the many millions? Under the law, polluters are obviously held responsible for the cleanup bill. However, here's the caveat. Taxpayers may end up footing the bill anyway if the polluters are unable to pay, cannot be identified, or found. So let's now move into Newsday's environmental correspondent, Emily Dooley. She's been investigating these sites, and she actually wrote this wonderful article in Newsday a couple of days ago. It was really nice, and I'm trying to get to, let me summarize that and have you take us through that. Based on your analysis, Nassau County, Suffolk County, they basically top the list of these Superfund sites. What is behind that?
Well, Long Island has a very large population and a legacy of aviation, manufacturing, and industrial operations. So we live above our water, and health officials say that they pay special attention to kind of what happens here. That may they look more here than other places in the state may look.
Okay, but it's not all just industrial spillage, right?
No, in fact, 30% of the Superfund sites in Nassau County are from dry cleaners, and 9% of the sites in Suffolk are from dry cleaners.
Okay, so who then becomes responsible for identifying these sites, and who's responsible for cleaning them up?
The State Department of Environmental Conservation and the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency are charged with cleaning up the hazardous waste sites, though in many cases, local jurisdictions alert the authorities to contaminated sites first.
Okay, and so what is then the big concern for Long Islanders because of these sites?
Well, we live above our water, and what happens here impacts the water. And unlike most places in New York State, where they get it from creeks and rivers and reservoirs, we get it from beneath us, and contaminants can affect the supplies of what we drink, what we bathe, all sorts of ways that we use water.
Okay, well, Emily Dooley, that was a wonderful article a couple days ago. You could people at home you could find that at newsday.com in the link. So appreciate you taking the time to talk with us. All right, we're going to move on to another question for this time from the Sierra Club. This is Matt Kern, the executive committee member of the Sierra Club's Long Island group. Go ahead with your question.
Yes, Long Islanders represent the largest community in New York State that still relies solely on the Department of Environmental Conservation to protect its drinking water resources. But how can we continue to rely on this agency when lawmakers in Albany can and have repeatedly slashed the budget?
Okay, we're going to start off back with our panel, and I know Adrian Esposito really wants to answer that. Can you respond to that?
The answer is we can't. The mantra we hear, unfortunately, outside of Albany is that we're going to do more with less. And that's unfortunately not true. We do less with less. We do less monitoring of toxic sites. We do less monitoring of sewage treatment plants. We do less monitoring of the harmful algal blooms. We're doing less with less. To do more with more, we need more staff for the DEC. We need them to be staffed up, protect drinking water and coastal water.
Okay, obviously this is a very, very big issue. Let's get some of our state lawmakers in on the panel involved here. Assemblyman Bob Sweeney of Lindenhurst, chair of the Assembly Committee on Environmental Conservation. What is your take on this issue of slashing the budget?
Yeah, I would agree with the need to increase DEC staff in order to address this and many other issues. But I would also like to point out that DEC does not have the sole authority. In fact, nobody on Long Island has the sole authority to manage this resource. And that's one of the big problems that we have. So while DEC plays a preeminent role in terms of addressing many of the environmental issues related to our water quality, even they don't have the authority or the ability, because of staffing, to get totally involved and be sort of the kingmaker when it comes to protecting our water quality.
All right, let's move it over to the other state senator this time, Carl Marcelino of Oyster Bay, with us, former chairman of the Senate Environmental Conservation Committee. Can we count on the DEC, or is it just that there's so many scattered committees?
Bob is absolutely correct. There is a spread out of people in charge and organizations in charge, and it would be good to combine that. There is legislation looking to do just that, to combine these entities and try to make an overriding organization to handle that, but that would still need money, and it would still need to be funded appropriately. We and Bob and in the Assembly and myself and others in the Senate have consistently put money into the budget for this. And as negotiations come and priorities are set, it tends to be cut out. But that means that the agencies have to reallocate within their own departments and within their own associations and reallocate priorities and put more people into these investigations.
But State Senator, isn't that exactly what happened with this current budget, with the current budget, that the Superfund cleanup and the DEC was drastically slashed?
Drastically, no more than any other agency in the state. I mean, they all took a cut because the state, the money just wasn't there. So you had to take it across the board. So every agency in the state took an across the board cutting. But priorities are priorities, and they should be adjusted, and more people within the agency can be assigned to do this kind of work. We also depend upon the water agencies and the water commissions that exist around here. They do an excellent job. They work hard. They provide you with a quality product, and they don't take it for granted. They test and retest and test and retest.
Okay.
We test what they test. That's as simple as that.
Obviously a very big topic. I wish we had more time to spin on it, but the conversation does continue. We're not even close to scratching the surface. Coming up, a look at a toxin that's having a major impact on our waterways and our water supply. Nitrogen, doing a number on our bays, streams, and lakes. So what, if anything, can be done about it? That's straight ahead in tonight's special, What's in the Water? Only on News 12 Long Island. And welcome back to the News 12 Newsday special, What's in the Water? Brown tides, red tides, bays, streams, and lakes slowly being choked by algae blooms. And scientists say much of that is a result of elevated levels of nitrogen in the water. Nitrogen from fertilizers, sewage treatment plants, but above all, cesspools and septic tanks. Now, Jewel asked this question on the News 12 Facebook page. What is the next step for keeping contaminants out of our waterways? All right, so let's just get some answers. Kevin McAllister, coastal biologist and the head of a group called Peconic Baykeeper, which works to protect waterways, including the Great South Bay. So let me pose this question to you. Nitrogen, how big of a problem is it, and are we doing enough to deal with it?
It's an enormous problem. We've reached the tipping point. So the development from the 60s and 70s and 80s with travel time and groundwater, where goes groundwater, there goes our bays. So as it's enriched with lawn fertilizers and septic releases, wastewater, ultimately it's reached our shorelines. So now we're seeing reoccurring brown tides and red tides and rust tides, depleting oxygen, causing fish kills and crab kills. I think the solution really is dealing with the source. We have to start implementing advanced wastewater treatment systems that denitrify. And there's cost implications on basically residential properties as well as sewage treatment plants. And I think the other step to this is really defining receiving waters with water quality standards that is being mandated by EPA, the federal government, to the Department of Environmental Conservation, and they've been lagging. So ultimately we have to define what can we assimilate what's healthy waters and deal with the source for receiving?
Well, let's talk about some of those potential regulations. Let me move to Assemblyman Sweeney, because I know that you actually have a proposed bill to deal with the regulation of nitrogen. Is that enough? And what is the bill? What would it do?
The bill recognizes that nitrogen is probably the #1 issue that we have on Long Island in terms of our water quality. And we talked about the drinking water that is treated and that we then consume. It's important to remember that that same groundwater comes up and becomes our streams and our lakes and our ponds, which in turn flows into our bays, and that water is not treated. And that water is killing our aquatic life. That should be the canary in the coal mine warning to us that something is wrong and that we need to address it. And the biggest something that is wrong is nitrogen in our water.
Okay, let's move this back to the water side of this. Walter DeWittiak, what is the Suffolk Health Department's, what is their role in tackling this issue, nitrogen?
Our piece of the water budget is primarily wastewater treatment and sanitary systems. The major sources of nitrogen are atmospheric deposition, fertilizer, and wastewater. And everybody is in agreement that there's too much nitrogen in the groundwater. Now, again, to emphasize that the drinking water is safe, the average nitrogen is now 3 to 4 parts per million in the public water supply, well below the standard of 10. The surface water guideline is down at 0.5, so we're almost 10 times higher than a healthy number for the surface waters. This is
But aren't those standards based upon an old study that dealt with humans, the blue baby syndrome, and not necessarily with the shellfish?
The 10 part per million standard is based on blue baby syndrome. The 0.5 part per million guideline is based on health department and EPA and DEC studies about optimal surface water protection. And this isn't a health department problem, it's not a DEC problem, it's an everybody problem from the federal, state, local, town governments, and citizens. We just have to do better with nitrogen. Now, our next step is to finalize a comprehensive water resources management plan, and our county exec has committed to do better with wastewater. We've already improved performance of treatment plans from an average of 10 to 7. We've approved 5 cluster decentralized systems up from 1, so there's more options. It's going to drive competition and improve performance. In the next year, we hope to have a series of individual on-site treatment systems available for nitrogen removal. The county's announced a $20 million grant through 0.25% assessment stabilization reserve funds for Riverhead, Northport, Wyandanch, and Patchogue. Okay. More to come.
And let's talk about, because I want to bring in, if we're talking about the local government, let's move this over to Dr. William Spencer. You're a member of the Suffolk County Legislature and chair of the Suffolk Health Committee. Is the nitrogen issue, is that something you, both as a legislator and as a physician, is that something that you're concerned with?
Certainly. The biggest source of nitrogen actually is from urine. And so most of the nitrogen that we see that's in our wastewater really comes from urination. And so the fact that we are so, we sit over our sole source aquifer and there's so little sewering, we're only 25% sewered, that's really the basic problem. When we have our waste above our drinking water, that's really the major issue with nitrogen, as well as runoff from our homes into our bays and rivers. So we're working on that on the local level. We're moving forward. We're working with our state and all our different agencies, but we're moving forward with a plan locally to address these issues.
Okay, appreciate that answer.
An important point, if I may. We've always managed
real quickly, if you can. We're going to move on.
We've always managed wastewater for drinking water protection. That's a 20-fold difference in ecological protection.
Okay.
So we have to start to move in that direction to protect our bays, our ponds.
Okay.
our streams.
Obviously, a very big topic and more to talk about that, but let's move on real quickly so we can cover more topics. People who are aware of this issue, they've called for limiting the use of fertilizers. What do Long Islanders think is the best way to deal with this issue? Well, according to a News 12 Hofstra poll question, 9% say residents should fertilize less often, while 35% think the use of fertilizers on lawns should go completely eliminated. 16% wouldn't make any changes at all. Well, one viewer posted this question about pesticides on our Facebook page. Aim Laney asks, what is the DEC doing to protect our groundwater from further pesticide contamination? The DEC is a Department of Environmental Conservation. That's a part of the Cuomo administration. It's responsible for protecting the environment from various sources of pollution. The state DEC did not respond to our invitation to participate tonight. Doesn't mean we're not going to talk about it. So what about pesticides? According to the draft Suffolk County Groundwater Management Study, traces of 80 pesticides or their breakdown products have been detected in public and private wells. So, Dick Amper, back to you. Where do those pesticides come from, and are they a threat?
Well, they come from us. They come from farmers who put that on their farm fields. We, as homeowners, put them on our plants, on our lawns too much. Listen, the folks have got that right. They understand that these things will need to be banned or curtailed or completely adjusted for a sole source aquifer. This is not just any place, it's a place where the groundwater is being impacted. Okay. So we need to do something about pesticides, but what I'm confused about this is that Newsday and News 12 has spent a week explaining all of what's in our water and why that's problematic, and when we hear from the Water Authority and the Health Department, they don't seem to act like we really need to do something, and I think we do.
Okay, well, we're going to continue the conversation. I know they want to jump in there right now, but let me get this in real quick. The Long Island Farm Bureau and the Cornell Cooperative Extension were both invited tonight, but they did decline our invitation. However, in an interview we did with our What's in the Water series, Farm Bureau Executive Director Joe Gergela had this to say.
A part per billion, the average person doesn't understand what that means. It's equivalent to a drop of water in a lake. The things that we're finding are 1, 2, 3 parts per billion. Well, maybe we need to say, okay, at 5 parts per billion, the state needs to take a time out and take a look at the use. Should we stop using it? We're open to that. We're not going to be irresponsible or disrespectful of all of us that live here. We drink the same water, we all live here. This is extremely important to all of us, but we want it to be based on good, sound science.
All right, so you're hearing the issue. So should local and state government lighten up on laws or tighten up on laws to prevent pesticides from seeping into the groundwater or other contaminants for that matter? So let's toss this over to State Senator Marcelino. What do you think about this?
There's a lot of laws on the books right now, and it's a matter of enforcement. It's also something that we also have to face. Dr. Spencer was perfectly correct. We are the source of much of the nitrogen that goes into the ground. If we don't sewer it, if we're not sewered properly, if we don't treat the sewage properly, which means an expensive investment on the infrastructure of our sewage treatment facilities so that that stuff is taken care of before it gets put out, we're going to have a worse problem. We are the victims of our own success. People want to come to Long Island and live here because it's a good place to live, work, and raise a family. But when we have more people, that means more waste to be produced, and we've got to treat it. That's going to cost an awful lot of money, and the local officials and state officials and federal officials have to provide that money.
Okay, so let me come back over here. Either one of you can answer that question. I want you to respond to Dick Amper when he said that you're not concerned about the water quality.
Okay. But where I agree with Dick Amper and with Adrian is that we would love to see the level of nitrogen and contaminants going into the aquifer reduced or eliminated, okay? As the Water Authority, we have the obligation to provide clean water, and we do whatever we need to do to make sure that it's clean, including sometimes taking wells completely off-site and not using them either permanently or temporarily. We have one nitrate filtration system. That costs us twice as much than it does to produce water for the rest of our system. We have 587 wells. You do the math. So we agree with them. We would like to reduce the levels that goes in there because that will make our job a lot easier.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it right there. I know there's more to talk about here. But coming up next, a question that many Long Islanders have been asking for decades now. Is there a link between contaminated water and cancer clusters? A look at this gravely serious topic when we come back. Welcome back. Let's turn now to a subject that's on the minds of a lot of people when they think about groundwater contamination: cancer. All over Long Island, there are people who believe there are cancer clusters in their neighborhood. That includes Elena Greffe of Mattituck.
Next door, he died of cancer. Across the street has cancer. I do. So if you could walk across from the yard from one to the other, and the women all have had cancer. I'm pretty sure there is a connection between what was put in the water years ago and what's happened.
Plus, a viewer named Mary Beth wrote to us on Facebook, and she wants to know, is there any connection between our water supply and the high incidence of breast cancer on Long Island? All right, so let's bring in Dr. Amy Ukatz, environmental toxicologist with the Suffolk County Department of Health. So let me pose a question to you. What do you think? Are there cancer clusters on Long Island, and is there some type of correlation between the contamination in our water and the cancer clusters?
Right. So I can only speak to Suffolk County since I work in the Suffolk County Department of Health Services, but certainly there is a concern. We often get these calls from the public about cancer in their neighborhood. Certainly there is. Cancer is actually a fairly common disease. 1 in 2 men and 1 in 3 women will, over their lifetime, get cancer. So anybody looking in their neighborhood may see this, potential what appears to be a cancer cluster. Anyone who is concerned about cancer in their neighborhoods should certainly call us at the county health department or call the state health department, because they do evaluate cancer clusters for the state. We do know that there are isolated areas or even private wells that have contamination, but we know in general that the water that, especially if you're on public water, the water that you drink is clean because of the treatment if there is contamination. So in general, the overall water quality of what people are drinking is good. If you have a private well, however, we don't really know. So anyone with a private well should have their water tested at least annually is our recommendation.
Yeah, that's a big issue in
It
Suffolk
is
County.
a big issue, yes.
Appreciate that. Well, let me add to this. We spoke about this issue with Dr. Kenneth Spaeth, head of environmental medicine at North Shore LIJ. Here's his take.
We tend to find that these lower doses, even over long term, seem to be less of a risk, but I think there needs to be more study to really make sure that's true. And we may even be at a point now where the levels that we use to determine whether we're above or below a safe amount should be re-examined and perhaps reconsidered in light of science that's come out in recent years, and maybe it's time to lower what we consider permissible.
All right, we've been talking about that tonight. Let's turn this back to our panel. Jim Gorn, what's your reaction to what Dr. Spaeth has to say?
Well, again, that is why we test for twice the number of contaminants that we're required to by federal and state law. And if we see any sort of a problem, we will shut that well down way before it ever gets into the system. And I can assure you there is nothing in the public water supply that we believe would ever lead to cancer. However, when you're talking about private wells, as it has been pointed out, it isn't tested as often. It isn't subject to the same scrutiny, and I think people should be concerned.
Okay, well, let's talk about some of those isolated areas that we've been mentioning. One of the areas in the island is particularly concerned about the possible link between contaminated water and cancer are the people who live in Bethpage and those surrounding communities. So here to ask her question is Deanna Verbowen from a group called the Bethpage Cancer Project. Go ahead and ask your question to the panel.
Hi. With the new information that radium has entered the Bethpage water, why aren't the New York State lawmakers, the DEC or the EPA, putting pressure on Grumman to allow further testing of the Grumman's additional wells that Grumman publicly stated could be tested? We, the residents of Bethpage, know that these toxic plumes will never be cleaned the way they should have been cleaned 20 years ago. But the Bethpage Water District cannot fight this alone. Our lawmakers and government should be doing everything in their power to protect us for the future. My life, my family's life, the life of every resident of Bethpage and in the surrounding area is worth a lot more than the price tag that Grumman and the U.S. Navy are putting on this project, this problem. The future of my children depends on this testing, And the Grumman and the U.S. Navy have an obligation to us to protect us for the future. So I ask you again, why aren't you putting pressure on the DEC and the EPA and the New York State lawmakers to...
Obviously, a lot of passion in that question. So let's turn around. Let's get the official response. I'll try to get back to you. Dennis Kelleher, what would be the official response to that?
Well, actually, our firm is the engineering firm for the Bethpage Water District. And this is not a new issue, contamination in the Bethpage Water District. The Bethpage Water District has been fighting with Grumman and Navy probably for the last 30 years because their wells started to become contaminated 30 years ago with VOCs. And they've received some money to put on treatment systems, but this radon is a new thing, radiologicals, and they want to get, the Bethpage Water District wants to go and do more sampling, and they're not getting permission to reach all the wells to do the testing.
Adrian Esposito, are you hearing what you want to hear?
No, well, in part from Dennis, but also she's exactly right. What's happening right now in Bethpage, frankly, I think is criminal. Number one is they will not clean it up. You're exactly right. It won't ever be clean water. As much as we've heard that professed today, when you have clean water, it's H2O. When you have treated water, it's water with trace amounts of chemicals. And we just heard the doctor say you might have less of a chance of a risk, but you still have a risk. That water should have been cleaned up and remediated 20 years ago, and it should be cleaned up and remediated, hold on, Stone, before it gets to the Massapequa Water District as well. It's criminal. It shouldn't happen. Every lawmaker should be with this community.
Okay, and I know both of you have been talking about it. I want to get real quickly.
Water district,
Let me get real quickly.
Shut the well down.
Let me get the state senator to weigh in on this real quickly if you can.
In 2009, County Executive Mangano and I asked the Health Department, New York State Health Department, go in there and test an area of Bethpage where we saw an intrusion of chemicals and VOCs in the air quality in the groundwater. They did a test. They reported back in 2012 or 13, I forget which, it was about a year ago, and they found cancer in various households that they were able to reach, but they came to no conclusion of any significance. They didn't say there were clusters. They didn't call it a cluster. Ed and I disagreed. We didn't think the sample size was high enough. We didn't think they did enough of a job. We asked them to go back and do it again with a bigger sample and a bigger study. They adamantly refused.
Okay, well, obviously this is a complex issue and a very passionate one for everyone on the panel and for yourself, so we're going to have to move on. But I appreciate the comments. Let's go back to another. This is a two-part question. We're going to start here with Marianne Johnston. You're with the affiliated Brookhaven Civic Organizations. Go ahead and ask your question to the panel.
I've listened very carefully, and I'm not pleased with what I'm hearing, but one of the things I need to hear is how can we work together to develop meaningful methodologies, legislation and judicial action that has the teeth. They refuse to do it? I can't believe that. This needs to be done. And what can we do as citizens to compel changes in water quality standards, in health and safety protections, and to modify and reform our outdated land use policies, which are contributing in an enormous way to the pollution we see in our bays, our creeks, our waters, and our groundwater. And something needs to change, and it needs to change because we have a very short window to do it.
Okay, before we get to any reaction from the panel, we're going to go with another question here. This is Pat Nicolosi of the Elmont East End Civic Association with a related question. That way we can
I have two questions. One is, why can't Long Island have one water authority to monitor the quality of our water? And two, I live relatively close to Manhattan. I go to Manhattan a lot. Their water quality and their taste of the water is delicious. I haven't had a drink out of my faucet in over 30 years. Doesn't that speak volumes to the quality and the taste of our water?
All right, well, that's a great point, and there are a lot of agencies that deal with that, so let's get a quick little Water 101. Quite a confusing clutter of government agencies that have control over Long Island's water. The New York State Health Department sets drinking water contamination limits. The Nassau and Suffolk Health Departments enforce them. Then dozens of water districts and companies are required to do their own water testing and put out quality reports. Then the State Department of Environmental Conservation, on the other hand, is charged with preventing pollution from getting into the groundwater in the first place. As you can tell, there are a lot of agencies here. Meanwhile, municipalities and county planning departments, let's not forget them, they influence land use, which has a large bearing on pollutants getting into the water supply. So, Assemblyman Sweeney, I'm going to deal with you right now because I know that you have a proposed bill that would at least create an agency that consolidates representatives from different departments that would come together with an advisory group and set some type of uniform plan. Is that the right move? And where is that right now?
Yeah, and I think that actually gets to the heart of the questions that we've just heard. Where do we go from here? And shouldn't there be someone in overall charge? Well, yes, there should be. As you've pointed out, we have all of these entities, each of which plays some role in our water quality, but there is no one entity that you can point to that has overall responsibility. No one you can say, you know, it's your job, get it right. And that's a problem because there's no accountability. And so the legislation that I'm sponsoring, it's a study bill that I put out there to kind of focus some attention on the issue and get a discussion started so we can move forward, would essentially create a Long Island Water Quality Commission, which would be an overall charge of planning and implementing a water quality plan for all of Long Island, because our aquifers don't stop at the county line. We have all these different entities that are responsible. There needs to be one that is responsible.
Well, let's bring this into on the state level, on the county level. When you're dealing with that, you actually have a bill yourself that would somehow try to consolidate all these different water companies together and basically do the same thing, creating a report within 3 or 4 years that would implement some type of uniform standard. Is that the right plan for Suffolk County?
Well, it keeps the discussion in the forefront. We need to move forward, and a lot of times once we get into bureaucracy, we get bogged down. So my legislation that was introduced with the Suffolk County Water Authority and a couple of other legislators, we held Nassau and Suffolk County water quality hearings, and what we're proposing is a Commission on Aquifer Protection that would be able to happen with existing infrastructure. And so it would be able to get off the ground running, take the existing technology and start to move forward so that as we get larger organizations that have more jurisdiction, then they would be able to kind of pick up where my Aquifer Committee leaves off.
Okay, it sounds like at least some lawmakers are at least starting the conversation, so that's a good thing. But unfortunately, we have to take a quick, short break. But when we come back, which is better? Bottled water or that old H2O that comes right out of the tap? That's coming up next on News 12 Long Island. All right, welcome back. We want to let you know that there are a lot of resources available for you if you want to know more about your water quality in your neighborhood. Newsday's team has developed some interactive features that'll give you a better handle on what's in the water. And we have Tim Healy here to take over and give us a little test drive. So I'm going to let you go through some of the interactive sites that you guys
Sure.
put together.
Okay, Stone. Well, the first one I'd like to show you is a site we did that shows the 254 Superfund sites, state and federal Superfund sites on Long Island. Part of it is a map that you can zoom into, find your neighborhood, and then once you're there, click on a site that's near you, and what'll pop up is a box that tells you all about the site, what it's called, its location, the history of the site, the contaminants that were found there, whether there was groundwater contamination, if there's a plume. And within that pop-up box, there'll be a link to a federal
And what
state
are,
report.
what are some of the other sites that you have, real quickly?
Okay.
We've got about 30 seconds.
Sure. Second site we did was to take a look at the violations that have been issued against public drinking water systems on Long Island. We looked at a 7-year period from 2006 to 2012 and basically got every violation that was issued by the state against a local drinking water company. So if your water company's on there once, that's probably not so bad. If they're on there several times, it's something to be concerned
In
about.
addition to these links, you have numerous sites, newsday.com, to let people get some more information about
We
this.
do sites of our own, and we point to some sites, some federal sites and state sites that'll tell you more about the contaminants.
All right, Tim Healy, Newsday, I appreciate your time. Thank you very much for taking us through that. All right, well, here's the question. A lot of Long Islanders shun their tap water in favor of the bottled water. But is what you buy in the store really better? Here's a look.
Bottled water is now the second most popular beverage in the United States after soda. Americans buy a staggering 1 billion bottles of water a week. Many of us think bottled water is free of contaminants.
That's why I buy bottled water.
But is bottled water safer than what comes from your tap? 5 years ago, a study by the Environmental Working Group found 38 contaminants in 10 brands, though all were within federal safety limits. Bottled water suppliers are not required to file detailed annual water quality reports, as are local tap water suppliers. And there is no law forcing bottlers of purified water to reveal the source they use. In fact, a lot of bottled water is simply treated tap water. The Food and Drug Administration oversees bottled water, and the industry insists all of its products are tightly regulated and safe.
All right, so let's go back to our experts. James Gorn of the Suffolk County Water Authority. What's your reaction when you hear that some people only drink water, bottled water?
Well, our wonderful lab, and we have one of the 10 best labs in the United States, has examined some of the bottled waters and compared it to ours, and our water is much safer. Plus, you have the issues of what contaminants get into the bottled water in terms of the whole processing, in terms of the environment. What do we need all that plastic for?
Okay, well, today on our Facebook page, I want to point this out. A viewer named Naomi asked if a Brita-type filter is enough to remove any toxins and contaminants that may be in the water. She worries because her water leaves that little orange ring. Some of us have seen that. We'll turn this one over to Dennis Kelleher. So, Dennis, is a Brita filter enough? And if so, what type of filter should we be using?
Actually, if you get your water supply from a public water supplier, there is no need for a filter of any type. However, some people don't like the taste because of the chlorine that's added to the water. So a home filter such as a Brita, which uses activated carbon to remove the chlorine, is a proper thing to use. It's the same activated carbon that we use in the public water supply system to remove organic contaminants. The key is to make sure you follow the manufacturer's recommendations, or it actually could discharge contaminants into the water that weren't there in the first place.
All right, I appreciate that answer. So, unfortunately, there was, as always, too much to talk about. Very big subject, a lot to cover. We do have some time for some final thoughts from our panel. So quickly, I know that Kevin, you wanted to say something and react to some of this legislation. So real quickly, if you can do this within about 30 seconds.
Yes. There might be merit to overarching new commission, but I will say the buck stops with DEC. Under the Federal Clean Water Act, they've been delegated authority to enforce the law, protect our surface waters and our groundwater, and they have failed us. And what's failing us is enforcement of these laws for ultimately the responsibility with this agency. So we are litigating against DEC, the State Parks Commission, to basically do what is required under federal law to clean our waters, to ensure that wastewater discharges are not affecting water quality.
Okay.
So,
and I appreciate the main thought. Dick, let's if you could keep it brief.
What's important about this is that maybe the DEC isn't doing its job and it isn't properly staffed, and neither are all of those departments that we've talked about. So it's not sufficient simply to say, let's make one do their job. Everybody has to do the job. The number one function of government universally is public health and safety. And I'm hearing people say, we're meeting the legal requirement, we can't really make them do it, so we'd better do something different or we're going to see more of the same.
And let's just toss it down real quickly, if you can, to the state senator.
I asked the question about how can we get involved, how can we help the government do better? By getting involved, just like most of you are in this audience. You're activists. My good friend Adrian over here is an activist, and while I don't always agree with everything she says, she's on the right track. She keeps you moving. Dick keeps you moving. They stick the pins in people, and they make us jump and they make us react. Thanks, and that's well, you got a nice pin there. But the nature is, you got to get involved, you got to become educated, you got to know what's going on to be an educated consumer.
And with that, I'm going to give you 15 seconds if you could stop.
The bottom line is the public needs to understand we have to stop listening to the bureaucratic mumbo jumbo that everything's safe. Drinking water is degrading, our bays are becoming polluted, we're losing our way of life here on Long Island. Don't accept it, fight back, join us.
And I don't mean to cut you guys off, but we just ran out of time. I really apologize, but I appreciate all of your thoughts. Thanks to our expert panel and the crowd, of course, for taking the time to explore this critical topic with us tonight. Also, be sure to check out news12.com and newsday.com, where we have our entire 5-part investigative series. You can also go to channel 612 and see the extended interviews on a wide range of topics. On behalf of everyone at News 12 and Newsday, I'm Stone Grissom. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned. Plenty of news coming up right after the break.